I am going to tell you the story of the worst airplane accident in history. It isn't 9/11, as 9/11 was a terror attack. It isn't Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 or Flight 17. It's about a defunct airline and an old airline. It doesn't take place over a massive airport like Heathrow or O'Hare. It takes place on the ground of a regional airport off the islands off the coast of Morocco. This is the Tenerife disaster. Date is March 27, 1977. KLM Flight 4805 is approaching Gran Canaria International Airport. It is flying from Amsterdam as part of a charter flight. The cockpit crew consists of Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, First Officer Klaus Meers, Flight Engineer William Schroeder, and 11 attendants. Von Santen is one of KLM's most senior pilots, his face appearing in many of their advertisements and brochures. He is also the airline's chief flight instructor. The plane they are flying is a Boeing 747-206B, given the name Region or Rhine. It is carrying 236 passengers. Counting the crew of 14, this brings the total amount of souls on board to 249. A few kilometers behind is Pan American Flight 1736. They are flying from Los Angeles after a stopover at JFK International, New York. They are also bound for Gran Canaria. The cockpit crew consists of Captain Victor Grubbs, First Officer Robert Bragg, Flight Engineer George Warnes, and 13 flight attendants. The plane they are flying is a Boeing 747-121 named Clipper Victor. This particular aircraft was the first 747 to be commercially operated and has been the first 747 to have been hijacked. The hijacking was a minor incident that resulted in no deaths. This 747 on its own had a very inauspicious history. And, as you'll see, it gets even more notable. It is carrying 380 passengers, with the total amount of souls on board being 396. At 13:15, while both planes are approaching Gran Canaria, a bomb detonates in the flower shop in the terminal, causing injury to 8 people. This bomb is planted by the Canary Island Separation Group, and they phone in a threat about a second bomb, which causes the airport to be shut down. The KLM flight and the Pan American flight are both diverted to the nearest open airport that can handle them, which is the Los Rodeos Regional Airport at Tenerife, as well as all other airliners bound from Gran Canaria. The Pan Am flight states that they would rather circle the airport until it was reopened, but they are ordered to go to Los Rodeos. The KLM and the Pan Am land without incident. Los Rodeos is now holding all of the incoming traffic from Gran Canaria, which includes 5 large airliners. Due to the lack of space, planes have to park on the taxiway, which means they have to back taxi or taxi down the only runway before they can be able to take off. After a short time, Gran Canaria opens again after the bomb threat is contained. The Pan Am flight prepares to taxi, but ahead of it is the KLM flight, which is refueling. One of the passengers of the KLM flight who lived on Tenerife decided to get off, leaving the KLM flight with 248 souls on board. While the KLM flight refuels, a fog rolls in, sharply reducing the visibility. At 16:56, the KLM flight contacts Tower, requesting taxi. Tower tells the KLM to taxi down the runway and make a 180-degree turn at the end to prepare for takeoff. The KLM pilot confirms and follows the instructions of the Tower. Soon after, the Tower instructs Pan American Flight 1736 to follow the KLM down the runway and take the third exit to the taxiway. The Pan Am crew asks for clarification. The Tower says, "The third one, sir. 1, 2, 3. Third 1. The Pan Am would taxi down the runway. They identify the first exit, as well as the second. There is no indication they see the third, although they likely do. Taking the third exit would require them to make a 148-degree turn off the runway, and another 138-degree turn to join the taxiway in the correct direction. This is impossible to do in a plane the size of a 747, so the Pan Am flight continues on towards exit 4, much closer to the KLM. Exit 4 would require the plane to only make two 35-degree turns, which is much more possible for a 747 to do. The KLM contacts tower at 17:05, saying, "The KLM 4805 is now ready for takeoff and we are waiting for our ATC clearance." The tower responds, misidentifying the aircraft as KLM 8705. It gives them takeoff clearance. The KLM pilot says that he understands and prepares to take off. The tower hears the engines revving over the frequency. He says, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." At the same time, the Pan Am flight says on the frequency, "And we're still taxiing down the runway, the Clipper Victor." These coming in at the same time results in the feedback, and the KLM pilot does not hear the entirety of the ATC transmission or any of the Pan Am message. The tower then contacts the Pan Am flight and says, "Papa Alpha 1736, report the runway clear." The Pan Am responds, "Okay, we'll report then clear." The tower says thank you at 17:06.31.8. This is the last transmission that the tower gives to the flights. The Pan Am pilot says to the crew, "Let's get out of here." The first officer responds, "Yeah, he's anxious, isn't he?" The flight engineer interjects, "Yeah, after he's helped us for a half hour, now he's in a rush." And the KLM pilot, as the plane is now accelerating down the runway, the flight engineer, who overheard the message that the Pan Am said that they'd report when clear, asked the KLM captain, "Is he not clear then?" The captain says, "What?" And the flight engineer asks again, "Is he not clear then, that Pan American?" That captain emphatically says, "Oh yes." 5 seconds later, the captain of the Pan Am flight sees the landing lights of the KLM and shouts, "There he is." He realizes that the KLM is accelerating towards him. At the same time, the first officer of the KLM flight shouts out, "V1," meaning that the plane was going too fast to abort takeoff. The KLM captain spotted the Pan Am and tried to take off prematurely, smashing the tail against the ground. The Pan Am flight yells that they're coming. The first officer starts screaming, "Get off, get off, get off," as the captain turns the plane sharply to the left and applies full power to get onto the grass to avoid collision. The KLM flight lifts off the ground, but it's too late. At 17:06.50, KLM flight 4805 collides into the side of Pan Am flight 1736 at 160 miles an hour. The impact destroys the Pan American plane, while the KLM crashes into the ground, slides down the runway, and bursts into flames. Both planes are destroyed in the crash. 61 people in the nose of the Pan American flight survive. Everyone on board the KLM flight is killed. In total, 583 people are killed, making it the worst commercial aviation accident in history. Firefighters take hours to put out the blaze that the KLM erupts in. KLM offers to bring one of the lead pilots, Jacob Velthusen von Zanten, to help determine the crash and the cause of the crash until they realize who he was. Velthusen was the captain of the KLM flight that crashed and burned. The investigation into the accident is done by the Dutch, the Spanish, and the American air agencies. The main cause of the accident is determined to be that Captain von Zanten of the KLM flight began takeoff without proper clearance. Major factors include the heavy fog that reduced visibility and the feedback that happened with two crucial messages. The first crucial message was from the tower, telling the KLM flight to stand by for takeoff, meaning to wait. The other crucial message was from the Pan American flight, saying that it was still on the runway and wasn't clear. If either of those had been properly received, von Santen would have likely waited until the Pan Am was clear. However, there was a feedback loop on the radio due to them coming in at the same time, and von Santen attempted to take off. Another major factor is the fuel that the KLM took on. This resulted in three different things. First, the time it took for the KLM to refuel allowed the fog to roll in over the airport and reduce visibility to about 100 meters. Second, it added 40 tons of weight to the plane and increased takeoff distance. Without that 40 tons, it is possible that the KLM would have passed over the Pan Am in the final moments on the runway. Finally, when the KLM crashed into the ground, the fuel ignited into a raging fire, killing everyone. Without the extra fuel, there likely would have been survivors from the KLM flight. There are also factors as a result of the air traffic controller. Los Rodeos Airport had no ground radar in 1977, meaning they couldn't see the planes on the runway when the fog rolled in. It also is alleged that they were listening to a football match inside the tower. However, there is little proof of that. The Pan Am also did not turn off the runway at exit 3 as they were told. They then contacted the tower to tell them that they wanted to exit at 4. This may have prevented the crash, as KLM believed the Pan Am gotten off on exit 3. KLM paid the families of the victims a total of $110 million, or $450 million in modern money. As a result of this accident, more rules have been set for communication between air traffic and plane crews. The word takeoff is to only be used when granted clearance for takeoff to prevent confusion on if or not clearance is granted. Multiple memorial sites have been created to remember the victims on board the Pan Am and the KLM. There was a memorial in the Westgard Park in Amsterdam, as well as one in Westminster, California, where many of the victims hailed from. In 2007, the 30th anniversary of the crash, a memorial was created to honor the victims. I'll quote the words of Patrick Smith, a pilot and blogger, who says it better than I can or anyone else can. The sculpture is in the shape of a helix. The spiral staircase, the builders describe it, a symbol of infinity. Maybe, but I'm disappointed that the more obvious physical symbolism is ignored. Early model 747s, including both of those in the crash, were well known for the set of spiral stairs that connected their main and upper decks. In the minds of millions of international travelers, that stairway is something of a civil aviation icon. How evocative and poetically appropriate for the memorial, even if the artists weren't thinking of it that way. The Tenerife disaster was the worst commercial aviation accident in history. There have been many after, many serious, but nothing was more devastating than Tenerife. I dedicate this podcast to the victims, innocent people who were taken too early on the runway of Los Rodeos.